hall was buzzing with excitement, the kind of energy that makes every sound feel louder and every movement more important. It was one of the most prestigious music competitions of the year, and the seats were filled with people who had high expectations. Critics with sharp eyes, music teachers who knew every note by heart, and students who dreamed of greatness all watched from their seats, waiting for the next performance. On stage, the grand piano gleamed under the bright lights, its black surface polished to perfection, almost daring someone to play it. Among the crowd, a young woman stood quietly in the wings, waiting for her turn. She wasn't famous, and she hadn't been trained at the world's best music schools. She had spent years practicing alone, in small rooms, with only her determination and love for music to guide her. Today, though, that quiet dedication would be tested in front of everyone who had ever doubted her. She adjusted the strap of her dress nervously and took a deep breath, reminding herself that all she needed to do was play. Her music would speak for her. The next performer was already on stage, a man who had won countless competitions. He had a confident smile, the kind that made people believe he had never lost. The audience applauded politely, but some eyes seemed more interested in him than in the music he was about to play. Whispers floated through the hall about his skill, about how he had trained since childhood, about how his performances were perfect. Then he looked at the young woman in the wings, his smile changing into something sharper. He laughed softly, loud enough for her to hear. "I hope she can even find the right notes," he muttered under his breath, smirking. The young woman felt her stomach twist. She had faced doubt before, from teachers, classmates, and even strangers who said she would never be good enough. But hearing it from someone so publicly confident, someone the audience admired, stung differently. She closed her eyes for a moment and tried to push it away. She reminded herself that she didn't need anyone's approval, that her music had value, even if no one else recognized it yet. She told herself that this was just another challenge, one she had been preparing for all her life. Back on stage, the man finished his performance. The audience clapped, many of them impressed by his technique. But when he left the piano, he didn't stop to acknowledge anyone else. Instead, he walked off with a self-satisfied grin, glancing at the young woman as if to say, "Good luck, you'll need it." The young woman took another deep breath and walked toward the piano. Every step felt heavier because the hall was suddenly full of expectant eyes. She felt the weight of every glance, every whisper, every doubt that had ever touched her. She felt the pressure of the competition, the critics, the people who might not understand her music. As she reached the piano, she ran her fingers lightly over the keys, feeling their smooth surface. It was familiar and comforting, like an old friend. She took a moment to look at the audience. Some were whispering among themselves, others were leaning forward in their seats, curious. She could feel the energy of the room pressing down on her, but she didn't let it shake her. She reminded herself that this was her moment. She didn't need to play for anyone else. She needed to play for herself, for all the hours she had spent alone, practicing, learning, and growing. The lights above seemed brighter now, casting a glow over the piano and her hands. She could see the reflection of her fingers on the polished surface, and it made her heart race. But she didn't rush. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and closed her eyes for a second. She remembered the first time she had played a song that made her cry with joy, the first time she had surprised herself with a melody she thought she couldn't reach. That memory filled her with calm confidence. She opened her eyes and focused on the keys. In the wings, the man who had laughed at her watched with a faint smirk, thinking he had already won before she even started. He leaned back slightly, confident that the audience would agree with him. But something about the young woman's calm posture made him pause for just a second. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable, but it was there. The audience held its breath, sensing the tension, not knowing exactly what was about to happen, but feeling that something different was coming. She placed her hands gently on the keys. The hall grew quieter, as if the world itself had paused to listen. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the room, some skeptical, some curious, some eager to see her fail. She didn't flinch. She took another deep breath and let her fingers hover for a moment. In that brief pause, there was a feeling of complete stillness, a moment suspended in time. It was as if the piano and the hall and all the people waiting were all holding their breath together, waiting for what she would do next. And then she began. Not with a grand flourish, not with a showy note meant to impress. She began with something simple, a soft, clear sound that filled the hall and made the audience lean in. The note resonated in a way that was unexpected, a perfect balance of strength and delicacy. People shifted in their seats, surprised by the quality of the sound. The man who had laughed moments ago straightened slightly, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. He had expected hesitation, perhaps a mistake, maybe even embarrassment. Instead, he heard precision, control, and something else he hadn't anticipated, emotion. The young woman closed her eyes again, letting the music flow naturally from her heart to her fingers. Each note was deliberate, each pause intentional. She wasn't thinking about the audience, the competition, or the critics. She was thinking only about the music, about the story she wanted to tell with each key she pressed. The hall, once full of murmurs and whispers, grew quieter. One by one, the spectators stopped talking. Even the most skeptical critics seemed to lean forward, unable to look away. The energy of the room shifted completely, from doubt and expectation to attentive silence. Somewhere in the back, a few students whispered to each other, recognizing the rare skill and heartfelt emotion that this young woman possessed. They couldn't believe what they were hearing. She was not just playing notes. She was telling a story that captured every struggle, every moment of practice, every quiet victory she had ever known. The hall, once filled with chatter and anticipation, now felt suspended in awe. Everyone was listening, fully present in a way that only music can demand. The young woman didn't rush the notes. She allowed each one to breathe, each chord to settle before moving to the next. There was a rhythm that felt natural and effortless, even though it was the result of years of dedication. The man who had laughed at her felt a tightening in his chest. He realized slowly that he had underestimated her, that his judgment had been premature. He had laughed without knowing her story, without seeing the countless hours she had spent learning and perfecting her craft. Now, he was forced to confront something he hadn't expected. Respect, surprise, and a touch of fear for the impact of her performance. By the time she finished the first small section of her piece, the hall was completely silent. No one moved, no one whispered, no one breathed loudly. The young woman lifted her hands from the keys, allowing the sound to fade naturally. She opened her eyes and looked up. There was a moment of stunned silence, a pause that seemed to stretch for several seconds, as if everyone was trying to process what they had just experienced. Then, slowly, the applause began. It started as a single clap, uncertain, tentative, and then grew louder, swelling into a wave that filled the hall. People were standing, cheering, clapping, some with tears in their eyes, some with wide smiles of disbelief. The young woman smiled softly, a quiet triumph shining through her. She hadn't just played notes on a piano. She had told a story, proved her skill, and silenced doubt in a way that words could never do. And for the first time in a long time, she felt completely seen, not for who she was expected to be, but for who she truly was, and what she could create when she trusted herself. The man who had laughed at her moments before now looked humbled. His expression had changed from arrogance to disbelief. He realized that true talent could not be measured by confidence alone, and that sometimes the quietest person in the room could leave the loudest impression. He stepped back, unsure of what to do, while the audience continued to celebrate the young woman's remarkable performance. That single moment, that first note, had shifted everything. The stage, the hall, and the audience had witnessed something extraordinary, and everyone would remember it for a long time. The applause for the young woman was still echoing through the hall when she took a step back from the piano. She felt her heart pounding, but not with fear. This was excitement, a kind of thrill she had never felt before in front of so many people. The energy in the hall had changed completely. People who had whispered doubts were now looking at her with curiosity and admiration. Even the critics, known for their harsh words and precise judgments, seemed to pause, pens in hand, unsure how to begin writing their reviews. It was a moment she had dreamed of for years, a moment she had imagined countless times in the quiet of her own practice rooms. As she gathered herself, she couldn't ignore the man who had laughed at her before. He stood near the side of the stage, his arms crossed, eyes narrowing slightly as he watched her. For a moment, she wondered if he would try to challenge her again, make another public joke. But instead, he was silent, as if trying to understand what had just happened. His silence was louder than any words he could have spoken. She realized that he had underestimated her completely, and now he was seeing the truth firsthand. Back in the audience, some students were whispering excitedly. One of them leaned over to a friend and said, "Did you see that? She didn't just play the notes. She made them alive. I've never seen anyone do that." Another added, "I want to practice like her. I want to feel the music the way she does." The whispers spread through the hall like wildfire, and soon the entire audience was buzzing with a mix of admiration and surprise. This was not just a performance. It was a revelation. The young woman knew she couldn't let this moment pass without continuing her music. She sat back at the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys. She didn't need to look at the audience. She knew all their eyes were on her. She could feel the tension and anticipation building again. This was the real test, the part where her skill and heart would truly shine. The first note had captured attention, but now she had to carry them through the entire performance, note by note, phrase by phrase. She began again, this time with a more complex melody. Her hands moved fluidly across the keys, each note deliberate and precise, yet flowing naturally. There was a story in her music, one of struggle, of quiet victories, of hope and determination. People leaned forward in their seats, completely absorbed. She could see tears glistening in some eyes, smiles spreading across faces. Even the man who had doubted her seemed unable to look away. The music created a bridge between her and the audience, a silent connection that no words could match. Her mind was clear, focused only on the sound and feeling of the piano. She remembered the long nights spent practicing, the moments of frustration when she couldn't get a note right, the times she wanted to give up but didn't. All of that poured into her performance now, giving it depth and emotion that no mere technical skill could achieve. She realized that the music was not just about impressing others. It was about expressing herself fully and honestly. Every key she pressed was a piece of her story, and the audience was beginning to understand it without a single word being spoken. In the wings, the man who had laughed at her shifted uncomfortably. He was used to being the center of attention, the one everyone admired. He had spent years perfecting his technique, believing that talent alone was enough to earn respect. But watching her, he felt something unfamiliar: doubt. He realized that confidence and showmanship were no match for authenticity and passion. She had something he couldn't buy or practice: a heart that spoke through her music, and a skill refined through persistence and love. As the performance continued, the young woman experimented with dynamics, soft passages flowing into strong, bold chords. She played with emotion, not arrogance, letting the music guide her fingers. The audience responded instinctively, leaning into every note, every pause, every subtle change in tempo. The critics scribbled notes furiously, struggling to capture the magic of what they were hearing. This was not a typical performance. It was transformative. It was the kind of music that stayed with people long after the last note faded. Midway through the piece, she introduced a section that was both delicate and powerful. The notes danced lightly across the keys, yet they carried weight and meaning. The hall seemed to hold its breath with each chord. People were completely immersed, forgetting everything else in the world for those few minutes. She could feel the emotions in the room, the awe and admiration, and it gave her an added energy, pushing her to play even more expressively. This was a moment of connection, a rare experience where performer and audience existed in perfect harmony. Even the skeptics in the audience were captivated. Some of them had come expecting mediocrity, expecting to witness an embarrassing failure. Instead, they were witnessing mastery and emotion intertwined so seamlessly that it left them speechless. The man who had doubted her realized that he had misjudged her entirely. His smirk had disappeared, replaced by a solemn recognition of talent that could not be ignored. He began to understand that true artistry was not about appearance, reputation, or confidence. It was about the ability to convey feeling through skill and dedication. As the piece progressed, the young woman's fingers flew over the keys with precision, yet every note felt natural, organic, and full of life. She felt a sense of liberation, as if she had been holding back all these years, and now she could finally release every note she had ever imagined. The music became a living thing, moving through the hall and touching everyone present. People closed their eyes to absorb it fully, some swaying slightly to the rhythm, others holding their breath during the quiet, tender passages. It was a shared experience, intimate and universal at the same time. When she reached the final measures, the young woman slowed her pace, letting each note linger, filling the hall with its resonance. She allowed the final chord to hang in the air, unhurried and perfect. For a moment, there was complete silence. No one moved, no one whispered. It was as if the hall itself was acknowledging the power of what had just been played. The silence carried the weight of admiration, shock, and deep respect. She felt a sense of accomplishment, knowing she had given everything she had to this performance. Then, slowly, the applause began. It started quietly, almost hesitantly, and then grew louder and louder, spreading through the hall like a wave. People stood, clapped, and cheered, some with tears in their eyes, some with wide smiles of astonishment. The young woman stood, bowing slightly, humbled by the reaction but proud of what she had achieved. She had faced doubt, pressure, and judgment. Yet she had risen above it all with her talent, passion, and perseverance. In the midst of the applause, the man who had laughed at her moments before stepped back. He was silent, watching, processing. He realized he had learned a lesson he wouldn't forget. Never underestimate someone based on appearances or reputation alone. True skill, true talent, and true heart could not be measured by arrogance or expectation. He felt a sense of respect, tinged with regret for the doubt he had shown. Watching her, he understood that greatness often comes quietly, from those who work tirelessly and believe in themselves when no one else does. The young woman left the stage finally, her hands still tingling from the music, her heart full of joy and relief. People came forward, offering congratulations, praise, and admiration. She smiled and thanked them, but inside she knew that the most important victory was her own. She had proven to herself, more than anyone else, that she could rise above doubt, that her dedication and passion were enough to command attention and respect. And she knew this was only the beginning. The music inside her would continue to grow, evolve, and touch lives in ways she could only imagine, starting with this unforgettable moment in the grand hall. After the performance, the young woman stepped off the stage and walked toward the side of the hall, her hands still trembling slightly from the intensity of the moment. She could feel the lingering energy from the audience, the way people's eyes followed her with admiration, curiosity, and awe. It was overwhelming yet exciting. For years, she had dreamed of being noticed, of having her music reach the hearts of others. Now that dream was unfolding before her eyes, and the reality was almost more than she could comprehend. In the wings, the man who had doubted her still stood silently. He had been confident earlier, certain that he would outshine her without effort. But now he looked unsettled. There was a moment of recognition in his eyes, a subtle understanding that her talent was real, profound, and undeniable. He had faced many skilled performers before, but there was something different about her, something that came from within and could not be faked. For the first time, he felt the sting of humility, and it was a lesson he would carry long after this competition. Back in the audience, whispers and murmurs spread quickly. People were talking about the young woman's performance in awe, sharing their impressions with one another. "Did you hear how she made every note feel alive?" one whispered. "I've never experienced anything like that in a live performance," said another. Some were inspired, scribbling notes or discussing her technique, while others simply sat, reflecting on the emotions they had felt. Her music had done more than entertain. It had moved people deeply, in ways words could barely capture. She walked toward the backstage area, taking small, careful steps. Her mind replayed the performance over and over, the first note, the delicate chords, the way the audience had gone silent at the most unexpected moments. She remembered the feeling of connecting with every person in the hall without speaking a word. It was a powerful moment, one that reminded her why she had dedicated herself to music in the first place. All the practice, all the lonely hours, all the moments of doubt had led her to this instant, and it felt as though the world had finally opened its eyes to her talent. One of the competition organizers approached her, a smile spreading across his face. He congratulated her, praising not only her technical skill but also the emotion she had conveyed. "You've truly captured the audience," he said. "Your music tells a story that goes beyond the notes." She thanked him quietly, humbled but proud. She didn't seek attention or accolades. What mattered most was the connection she had created, the way her music had touched people's hearts. And now, it seemed, that connection was being recognized and appreciated in ways she had never imagined. Meanwhile, the man who had laughed at her earlier finally stepped forward. He approached her cautiously, as if unsure how to speak. When he did, his voice was quieter than before, carrying a note of respect. "I misjudged you," he said. "Your performance, it was incredible. I didn't expect this." She nodded politely, acknowledging his words but not letting them define her. She had played for herself, not for his approval, and that was a lesson he had yet to fully understand. Still, she felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that her music had spoken louder than any words could. The competition was not over, but the atmosphere had shifted. Other performers were still waiting for their turns. Yet the young woman's performance had set a new standard. People were talking quietly among themselves, comparing her artistry to what they had just witnessed. Some were nervous, feeling the pressure to measure up. Others were inspired, eager to learn from her example. She moved quietly through the backstage area, aware of the attention but determined not to let it overwhelm her. She had more music to play, more moments to share, and she wanted to stay focused on what mattered most, the notes beneath her fingers. She found a quiet corner and sat for a few moments, closing her eyes and letting herself breathe. The adrenaline was still strong, her heart racing, but she welcomed it. It was a reminder that she had faced the challenge and succeeded. She thought about all the times she had doubted herself, all the moments she had questioned whether her music was good enough. And now, seeing the reaction of the audience, she realized that her efforts had been worth it. Her dedication had paid off, and for the first time, she felt a deep sense of validation. Not from praise alone, but from knowing she had stayed true to herself and her art. Her mind began to wander to the other performers who would take the stage next. She felt empathy for them, knowing the pressure they faced, the expectations they carried. She understood the mix of nerves and excitement, the fear of making mistakes in front of an attentive audience. But she also felt a quiet confidence, a sense that she had proven something to herself that no one could take away. The music was a part of her, a reflection of her experiences and emotions, and that was something unique and powerful. The competition organizers called her name to return to the stage briefly, to receive recognition for her outstanding performance. She walked out once more, smiling gently at the audience. People applauded again, this time with an even greater intensity. The man who had doubted her watched from the side, visibly affected by the display. He had expected to be the center of attention, but now it was clear that someone else had captured the hearts of the audience. He could feel a mixture of pride, surprise, and humility, realizing that greatness often comes from unexpected places. As she left the stage a second time, she could feel a sense of calm settling over her. The initial thrill of performance had passed, leaving behind a steady confidence. She knew that she had given her best, that she had shared her music honestly and completely, and that the audience had responded in kind. It was a powerful feeling, one that reminded her why she had chosen this path in the first place. Music was not about fame or recognition. It was about connection, expression, and the ability to touch lives through sound. Backstage, Other competitors whispered among themselves about her performance. Some expressed admiration, eager to understand how she had achieved such emotion and technical skill. Others were quiet, reflecting on the impact of what they had witnessed. The young woman listened politely, offering small smiles and nods, but she didn't let it distract her. She was focused on the next steps, on continuing to play and grow, on staying true to her music. She knew that one performance, no matter how remarkable, was only a part of her journey. The man who had doubted her earlier lingered nearby, watching her interact with the organizers and other performers. He could feel a shift within himself, an understanding that talent and passion could not be measured by arrogance or outward confidence alone. He had learned a lesson in humility, one that would remain with him long after this competition ended. She had shown him, and the entire audience, that true artistry comes from dedication, heart, and a willingness to persevere, even when the odds seem against you. As the young woman prepared for the next round of performances, she felt a quiet determination. She knew that there would be more challenges ahead, more moments where she would need to prove herself. But now she had evidence that her efforts could make a difference, that her music could touch people's hearts, and that her talent could be recognized in ways she had never imagined. The experience had strengthened her resolve, reminding her that persistence, dedication, and authenticity were the keys to success. She took one last deep breath and adjusted her posture, ready to return to the stage when called. The applause and admiration she had received were humbling, but they also fueled her passion. She knew that the journey was far from over, and that each performance was an opportunity to grow, to connect, and to inspire. With her heart steady and her mind focused, she walked toward the piano, ready to continue sharing her music with the world, confident that her story was only beginning and that her talent would continue to shine brightly in the years to come. The young woman sat at the piano once more, feeling the polished keys beneath her fingers. The room was quiet, but the silence was heavy with expectation. Every person in the hall seemed to hold their breath, waiting to see what she would do next. She could feel the energy from the audience, the mix of curiosity, admiration, and suspense. Her heart raced, but not with fear. This was excitement, the thrill of sharing her music with people who had begun to truly listen. She remembered the first note she had played and how it had shifted the entire atmosphere of the room. Now, she knew she needed to build on that moment, to create a performance that would remain in the hearts of everyone present. She took a deep breath, letting it settle into her chest, grounding her. The first note was always the hardest, but she was ready. She let her hands hover over the keys, feeling the familiar texture, the weight, and the responsiveness of the piano. Every detail mattered, and she felt connected to it as if it were an extension of herself. The man who had laughed at her earlier stood at the side of the stage, watching intently. His usual confident demeanor was gone. He had underestimated her before, and now he realized that she possessed something rare, skill combined with heart. He shifted slightly, trying to process the performance that was about to unfold, wondering what he had missed in his arrogance. The audience was similarly tense, sensing the importance of what was coming next. Everyone knew this was more than a competition. It was a moment of revelation. She pressed the first key, letting the note ring clearly through the hall. The sound was simple, pure, but it carried weight. It was a deliberate choice, a way to draw everyone in, to let them listen carefully and prepare for what would follow. She allowed the sound to settle, letting it fill the space. She could feel the shift in the audience, the way their attention focused completely on her. Whispers ceased, and eyes widened slightly as people realized that they were about to witness something extraordinary. She began the next section, moving her fingers with precision but also with emotion. Each note was intentional, each phrase carefully constructed yet flowing naturally. She didn't rush. She let the music breathe, allowing every sound to reach the audience fully. There was a story in her music, one of struggle, hope, and quiet triumph. People leaned forward, captivated, drawn into the rhythm and the emotion. Her playing wasn't just technique, it was feeling, and the hall responded instinctively. The man who had doubted her felt a strange tightness in his chest. He had been so sure of his superiority, so confident that he would be the center of attention. Now he realized that true skill went beyond outward showmanship. This young woman had patience, depth, and a heart that spoke through her fingers. Her music wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about expressing herself, and that expression was far more powerful than he had anticipated. As the performance continued, she shifted from soft, delicate passages to bold, strong chords. Each transition was smooth, natural, and full of expression. The audience reacted instinctively, leaning in, holding their breath, or closing their eyes to feel the music fully. Some were nodding, some smiled, and a few whispered quietly to each other, amazed at the skill and emotion they were witnessing. The hall had become a space where time seemed to pause, where every note mattered, and where the young woman's music told a story without words. Her mind was completely absorbed in the music. She remembered all the hours she had spent practicing alone, the moments of frustration and the quiet victories. Those experiences were now part of her performance, giving it depth and authenticity. She didn't think about the audience or the man who had laughed at her. She thought only about the notes, the rhythm, and the emotions she wanted to convey. Her focus was absolute, and it showed in the clarity and power of her playing. At one point, she introduced a particularly intricate passage. Her fingers moved swiftly and confidently, yet every note remained clear and precise. The audience watched, captivated, some leaning forward, unable to tear their eyes away from her hands as they moved across the keys. Even those who had come expecting a standard performance were drawn in completely. The man who had doubted her now stood silently, absorbing every moment, realizing that talent could not be judged by appearances alone. He felt a mixture of admiration and humility. The young woman allowed herself a small smile as she moved into the next section of her piece. The music became more expressive, more emotional, weaving a story of persistence, hope, and determination. She could feel the audience's response, the way they were listening not just with their ears but with their hearts. Each note resonated in the hall, filling the space and connecting with the listeners. The performance was no longer about proving herself. It was about sharing something deeply personal and moving everyone around her. She continued, carefully balancing technical skill with emotion. Each chord and passage flowed naturally into the next. The audience remained completely engaged, experiencing the story she was telling through her music. The silence between phrases added depth, letting the notes linger and echo, giving people time to absorb the meaning. She knew that this was the power of music, the ability to communicate what words often could not. She felt a sense of fulfillment as she realized that her music was touching people in ways she had hoped but never fully imagined. As the final section approached, she began to slow slightly, letting the notes breathe and resonate. Each chord became more deliberate, more powerful, as if summarizing the journey she had shared through her music. The hall was completely still, every eye fixed on her, every mind attentive, every heart receptive. She could feel the weight of the moment, the importance of this final impression. She wanted it to be perfect, not in a showy sense, but in a way that reflected the true depth of her dedication and talent. The last chord was played softly but with certainty. She held it, letting it echo through the hall, filling every corner with its resonance. Then, slowly, the sound faded, leaving behind a moment of complete silence. The audience sat frozen, absorbing the final note, processing the emotion, and feeling the impact of her performance. It was a moment of awe, of connection, of recognition. The music had spoken louder than any words could, and everyone present understood the power of what they had just experienced. Then, almost simultaneously, the applause began. It started quietly, as if unsure, then grew louder and louder, spreading through the hall like a wave. People stood, clapped, and cheered, some with tears in their eyes, some with wide smiles of astonishment. The young woman bowed slightly, feeling a deep sense of pride and humility. She had shared her music fully, and the audience had responded with genuine admiration. It was a validation of all the effort, persistence, and passion she had poured into her art. The man who had doubted her earlier stepped back, his face thoughtful and serious. He had been humbled by her performance, realizing that talent, dedication, and heart could surpass confidence and arrogance. He had learned a lesson that words could not convey, that true greatness often comes quietly, and that it cannot be judged until it is witnessed fully. Watching her, he felt a mix of respect, surprise, and reflection, understanding that appearances and assumptions could never define real skill. The young woman left the stage finally, her hands still tingling from the music, her heart full of joy and relief. She felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond the applause. She had played not for recognition alone, but for the love of music and the desire to share her story. The audience had understood, felt, and appreciated it. It was a moment she would carry with her forever, a reminder that dedication, passion, and authenticity were the true markers of success. She had faced doubt, expectation, and pressure, and she had risen above it with grace, skill, and heart. The young woman remained at the piano, feeling a deep connection to the instrument. She had already given one performance, and the response from the audience had been overwhelming, but she knew her journey on that stage was not yet over. The applause still echoed in her ears, the faces in the audience still fixed on her with awe and admiration. She could feel the tension building again, the anticipation of the next piece she was about to play. Every breath she took was in rhythm with her thoughts, steady and intentional. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the energy of the hall wash over her. She remembered the countless hours she had spent alone, practicing scales, chords, and melodies that no one else had ever heard. Those moments had been quiet and private, filled with determination and focus. Now, all of that preparation would come together in this next performance. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone else, yet she felt a quiet desire to share the depth of her ability and her passion for music. The man who had doubted her before was still watching. His expression had softened into one of awe. He had thought himself unbeatable, a master in every way, but watching her, he realized there was more to skill than practice alone. There was heart, emotion, intuition, and an ability to communicate through music that could not be learned from books or teachers. He shifted slightly, feeling the weight of humility settle over him as he recognized her extraordinary talent. The young woman began her next piece with a gentle touch, allowing each note to linger in the air. The hall seemed to hold its breath, every listener drawn into the quiet, delicate sounds. The music was not rushed or forced. It flowed naturally, like a river moving smoothly around stones. She could feel the emotion behind each chord, the story she wanted to tell unfolding through the notes. The audience was silent, completely absorbed, feeling the nuances of her expression. Her hands moved confidently, transitioning from soft passages to more dynamic sections. The contrast was breathtaking. She allowed the music to rise and fall, to ebb and flow with meaning. People leaned forward in their seats, drawn in by the power of her performance. She wasn't just playing notes. She was conveying feelings of hope, struggle, triumph, and joy. Each chord resonated in the hearts of those listening, creating a connection that was both intimate and universal. The man who had doubted her earlier felt a pang of realization. He had assumed that confidence and reputation were enough to command respect, but now he saw that they were no match for authenticity and talent. He watched as her fingers moved with precision, yet each note was filled with emotion. He felt a sense of admiration mixed with humility, realizing that he had underestimated her entirely. This young woman was not only skilled, she was extraordinary. As the piece progressed, she introduced a section that was both technically challenging and emotionally intense. Her fingers flew over the keys with fluidity and control, yet every note carried meaning. The audience was captivated, some closing their eyes to fully absorb the music, others sitting on the edge of their seats, completely immersed. The hall was filled with the sound of the piano, but it was more than just music. It was a story, a journey, a conversation between the performer and every listener. The young woman felt a sense of liberation as she played, as if all the years of struggle, doubt, and perseverance were being released through her fingers. She didn't think about the audience or the man who had doubted her. She was fully present, fully engaged in the music. Each note was intentional, each phrase carefully considered, yet flowing naturally with emotion. She could feel the resonance of the hall amplifying the impact, making every sound more vivid and powerful. The audience responded instinctively, caught in the web of her music. Some leaned forward, eyes wide with wonder. Others whispered quietly in amazement. Even the critics, known for their precise and often harsh judgments, were spellbound, struggling to put into words what they were experiencing. The man who had doubted her before could hardly believe what he was witnessing. He had thought talent could be measured by technique alone, but here was a living example that true artistry came from something deeper, something that could not be taught or faked. She shifted seamlessly into a series of flowing arpeggios, each note ringing clearly and perfectly timed. The music swelled and softened, capturing the full range of human emotion. She allowed herself to feel the story, letting the music guide her hands rather than forcing it. The hall seemed to exist in a bubble of sound and feeling, a shared experience between the young woman and everyone present. Each note was a bridge, connecting her heart to the hearts of the listeners. The man who had doubted her began to feel the full weight of the lesson she was teaching. He had underestimated her, not just in skill but in spirit. She had practiced in obscurity, without recognition, without applause. Yet here she was, commanding the attention of an entire hall with nothing but her talent and dedication. He could feel the humility settling in, a quiet respect growing for the young woman who had risen above doubt and expectation. The young woman moved into the final section of her piece, allowing the music to soar and fill the hall. Her fingers danced across the keys, precise yet expressive, controlled yet free. The audience was completely enraptured, some holding their breath, others with eyes closed, feeling the full emotional weight of her performance. Every chord, every pause, every note was intentional, a reflection of her dedication, her journey, and her heart. She slowed her pace gradually, letting the final chords resonate fully before fading into silence. The room held its breath for a moment, taking in the last notes, absorbing the depth and beauty of the performance. Then, as if on cue, the hall erupted in applause. The sound was overwhelming, a wave of appreciation and admiration that seemed to shake the very walls. People stood, clapped, cheered, some with tears in their eyes, others smiling broadly. The young woman bowed slightly, feeling a profound sense of accomplishment and humility. The man who had doubted her before stepped back, visibly affected. He had been humbled, inspired, and awed all at once. He realized that talent could not be measured by arrogance or reputation, that true artistry came from heart, dedication, and authenticity. He felt a mixture of pride and respect, knowing he had witnessed something extraordinary, and that he had learned a valuable lesson about underestimating others. The young woman finally stood, her hands tingling from the intensity of the performance. She felt a sense of completeness, knowing she had shared her music fully, honestly, and beautifully. The audience continued to applaud, some calling out her name, others simply clapping in appreciation. She smiled gently, feeling a quiet triumph that went beyond recognition. She had proven not only to the audience but to herself that her talent, dedication, and heart were enough to command respect and admiration. As she left the stage, the energy in the hall lingered, people still talking quietly about the performance they had just witnessed. The young woman felt a mix of relief, pride, and excitement. She knew that her journey was far from over, that there would be more challenges and performances ahead, but this moment would remain with her forever. She had shown the world the power of dedication, emotion, and authenticity, and she had done it with grace, skill, and heart. The applause and admiration were not the end, but a beginning, a recognition of the remarkable talent and passion she had carried all along. The young woman stepped away from the piano, her hands still tingling with the memory of every note she had played. The applause continued to echo in the hall, louder than before, and for a moment, she simply stood there, letting the sound wash over her. She felt a deep sense of calm and fulfillment, a feeling that all the hours, all the struggles, and all the quiet moments of practice had led to this. She had shared her music fully, honestly, and beautifully, and the audience had responded in a way she could never have imagined. People were still standing, clapping, cheering, and some even whistling in admiration. Faces glowed with awe, smiles were wide and genuine, and a few people had tears in their eyes. It wasn't just a performance anymore. It was an experience, a moment that had connected every listener to the music and to her story. She felt a quiet pride, not in the applause, but in knowing that her music had touched hearts in the deepest way. Backstage, the man who had doubted her earlier stood silently. He had watched her entire performance, and now he could not deny her extraordinary talent. His initial laughter and arrogance had been replaced with a complex mix of emotions: respect, astonishment, and humility. He had learned a lesson in underestimating others, and in understanding that true artistry came from heart, dedication, and authenticity. He felt a quiet shift within himself, a realization that recognition and applause were not everything. True skill was about the connection one could create with the audience and the honesty of expression. The young woman walked through the backstage area, accepting congratulations from organizers, mentors, and fellow performers. Everyone had something to say about her performance, about the precision, the emotion, and the way she had captivated the hall. She smiled and thanked them politely, but inside, she felt something more personal: validation for the years of effort she had put in, and confidence that she had truly found her voice. She knew that the applause was temporary, but the impact of her performance, the connection she had made, would last far longer. As the competition continued, other performers prepared for their turns, but the energy in the hall had shifted. The audience was still buzzing with excitement, whispers of admiration for her spreading like wildfire. People were comparing her performance to others, discussing her skill, her expression, and the way she had made every note meaningful. She had set a new standard, not through arrogance or showmanship, but through honesty and dedication. The atmosphere had changed from one of judgment to one of anticipation and appreciation. The man who had doubted her approached her cautiously, finally speaking in a quiet voice. "I underestimated you," he said. "Your performance. It was more than I could have imagined. I don't know what else to say." She nodded politely, her smile calm and sincere. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'm just glad the music could speak for me." He studied her for a moment, sensing the quiet confidence that came from within, the kind of strength that could not be shaken by doubt or expectation. He realized that she had won far more than applause. She had won respect and understanding. The audience continued to discuss and admire her performance as she moved away from the stage. Some were inspired to practice more, to reach higher, to find their own voice. Others reflected on the emotion she had conveyed and the story she had told through music. The young woman felt a profound sense of connection, knowing that her music had touched lives in ways words could not capture. She understood now, more than ever, that this was why she played, not for recognition, not for fame, but for the ability to move people, to connect hearts and minds through the language of music. The competition eventually concluded, but the memory of her performance lingered. People continued to speak of it long after leaving the hall, sharing the story of a young woman who had silenced doubt and captivated an entire audience with her talent and passion. The man who had doubted her remained in quiet reflection, understanding that true greatness could come from unexpected places, and that humility was as important as skill. He knew that he had witnessed something extraordinary, and he carried that lesson with him. For the young woman, the experience was transformative. She had faced skepticism, pressure, and high expectations, yet she had risen above them with her talent and heart. She had proven to herself that dedication, practice, and authenticity were more important than external validation. She felt a renewed sense of purpose and excitement for the journey ahead, knowing that her music had the power to inspire and connect people. Every note she had played, every phrase she had expressed, had left a mark on the hearts of the audience. As she left the hall, the applause still ringing in her ears. She reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the quiet hours of practice, the moments of self-doubt, the times she had almost given up but didn't. All of it had led to this triumph, this moment of recognition and connection. She knew that her path would continue to be filled with challenges, but she felt confident that she could face them, armed with her talent, her passion, and her unwavering dedication. That night, as she returned home, she felt a sense of fulfillment unlike anything she had experienced before. She had shared her story, not through words, but through music, and people had listened, felt, and understood. She realized that her journey was not just about winning competitions or receiving applause. It was about touching lives, inspiring others, and expressing herself fully. And in that, she found a joy that no amount of recognition could replace. The young woman's performance became a story that people spoke of for months. Music teachers used it as an example for their students. Critics wrote about the emotional impact of her playing, and aspiring musicians found inspiration in her dedication and talent. She had become a symbol of perseverance, skill, and authenticity. Her music had transcended the boundaries of the competition, leaving a lasting impression that would be remembered for years. The man who had doubted her left the hall that night with a sense of humility and understanding. He knew he had witnessed something exceptional and that he had learned a valuable lesson about underestimating others and recognizing true talent. The young woman had not only captivated the audience but had also left a mark on him, a reminder that greatness often comes quietly and unexpectedly, and that respect must be earned through dedication, heart, and authenticity. In the days and weeks that followed, the young woman continued to practice and perform, each note and phrase carrying the same honesty and emotion that had captivated the hall. She remained humble and focused, understanding that the journey was ongoing and that every performance was an opportunity to connect, inspire, and express herself fully. She knew that her music had the power to touch lives, and she embraced that responsibility with gratitude and passion. Looking back on the day of the performance, she understood that it had been a turning point, not just in her career, but in her life. She had faced doubt, pressure, and skepticism, and had emerged stronger, more confident, and more determined. She had learned that talent alone was not enough, that dedication, heart, and authenticity were essential. Most importantly, she had experienced the joy of connecting with an audience, of sharing something deeply personal and seeing it resonate with others. It was a moment she would carry with her forever, a reminder of what was possible when skill, passion, and courage come together. The applause, the admiration, and the recognition had faded, but the impact of her music remained. She continued to play, to teach, to inspire, and to connect with people through her art. And in every performance, she carried the lessons of that unforgettable day. That perseverance, dedication, and heart can overcome doubt. That true artistry speaks louder than words, and that every note has the power to touch lives in ways that are both profound and unforgettable.